I Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know that discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Welcome back to I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Buncher. Hey, and today I'm really happy to say that I've got a good friend of mine in, both from the PD and after we worked at the PD. Jay is here with me, and we're going to recount a SWAT call-out that he was involved in. But first, I'd kind of like to give some background on Jay and what he did and kind of give you an idea of who he is. So, Jay, if you want to say hello.
Hello.
Just if you want to kind of give us an overview of what you did when you were with the police department.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Kevin. I worked for the city of Tempe in Arizona for 20 years. I spent 17 of those 20 years working special assignments. K-9, 5 years. Narcotics, oh gosh, I can't even remember how long. Narcotics, 2 different tours of duty in narcotics, special assignment unit, and special investigations. And a 14-year concurrent assignment during those 20 years in SWAT.
Nice.
And I retired quite some time ago, and since then I've been opened up a private investigation business, and I've had a PI business since then.
And Jay and I actually had a business together for 3 years. Had a good time, had a lot of fun, and we just actually closed up shop like about a year ago and kind of went in some different directions on that. But so you had a really good career with the police department. And I knew Jay mostly from the SWAT team and then special investigations. And Jay was always one of those guys that was kind of like that super UC guy. I mean, he was really, really good at undercover stuff. And at the same time, he was probably one of the funniest guys. I can remember numerous times we'd be working a cover team or something while Jay was doing maybe a call girl investigation or something else. You could never catch Jay without something to say. That's the one thing I'll tell you. Listening to The Bug when Jay had it on was pretty entertaining. So yeah, so you got special investigations. You got a lot of time in K-9, 17 years in SIB.
Well, you know what? It would be 12 years in SIB. I guess K-9 was considered special investigations for a period of time.
That's true.
So 12 years, 3 years... 12 years in special investigations, five other years are in K-9, and part of that time was in special investigations. Then it was assigned to patrol at some point.
Gotcha.
But three years in a police car in a uniform, that's all I did.
Yeah, which is pretty rare. You know, again, I've talked about way back in the first episode the things that I had done in my career and everything. With regard to wiretap investigations and some of those, Jay has extensive experience in doing those as well, and was involved in a number of those bigger investigations. And then we touched on what you've been doing since then, and luckily today I've got you over here in my studio, and we're recording a podcast episode.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. For hopefully the first of a couple, I'm hoping,
I hope
Jay.
so.
So tonight's episode is actually, we're going to call it Malibu. And part of the reason for the title of Malibu is the fact that over the years, as we've had these, what would you say, larger scale, fatal SWAT call-outs or major incidents, if you're with the police department, a lot of times you would refer to that as the street that it occurred on. So for this particular incident that Jay's going to recount, it occurred on a street called Malibu. And whenever you would say Malibu in our circle, everybody knew what that meant. And there's some other call outs that we may or may not get into down the road. But so that is the title of this episode, is Malibu. So what I'd like to do is just kind of start the story from the beginning. So Jay, if you can take it away.
Okay. You know, it was quite some time ago, but I think, when you encounter some of these serious events that kind of leave a stamp or kind of like an indelible mark on your memory, I remember it pretty clear. I remember being in a patrol briefing, when we could actually hear our radio dispatch calling out a pursuit that was coming southbound from Scottsdale, which is a city directly north of our city, Tempe, and a patrol officer was chasing a suspect vehicle, and an individual had carjacked a civilian's vehicle, and an officer was chasing him, lights and siren, into our town and through our town. And like most pursuits, they end up getting picked up. Well, not most of them. Back when we're chasing a lot of people. We don't chase as many people these days as we used to, but back in the day, there were more pursuits, and one of our Tempe officers picked up the pursuit and basically took the baton from Scottsdale and chased the suspect vehicle southbound through our city for several miles through a real densely populated area, and ultimately the vehicle he was chasing crashed. After this particular crash in an intersection, the suspect got out of the car and he kidnapped a 6-year-old boy off the corner of that street, and he carjacked another vehicle, and he jumped back in the car and continued southbound in his new carjacked car for about another half mile, where he had a traffic accident in a major intersection. The suspect got out of the car holding the boy as a shield, holding his hostage as a shield, and the officer that was chasing him was doing the best he could.
So let me jump in for just a second, Jay, because I'm just gonna fill in the backstory from the Scottsdale perspective from the notes that I had before the interview. So this guy that they're dealing with, that Jay's talking about, he was a 50-year-old white guy, pretty small-statured guy. The one thing that I remember that kind of stood out was he had a tattoo on his back that said, "When I die, send me to heaven. I've spent my time in hell." A little interesting. He was wanted for an unlawful flight, which basically he bailed out of some charges out of Houston, Texas, for a homicide. He had an extensive history of robbery, burglary, and weapons violations. At this point, he is also suspected of a homicide in Phoenix. He was armed with a .44 caliber revolver and a 9mm semi-auto handgun. And then, as Jay described, he was involved in a pursuit in Scottsdale, and apparently he had carjacked 4 different victims over the last 2 days up in Scottsdale. Shots were exchanged between him, Sellers, and Scottsdale PD, and one of the Scottsdale guys got hit in the right shoulder. And we were talking about this ahead of time. We both are pretty confident that the cop that got hit in the shoulder was actually on a ride-along from the academy.
I'm pretty sure he was.
Yeah, so he wasn't even on his own yet.
No, he was out for his weekend ride-along.
Yeah, how do you explain that one to wife, girlfriend, or whatever? Yeah, by the way, I just got shot. I haven't even officially started the job. So the pursuit comes into our city. We pick it up. The officer follows. Then you have what Jay had described with the taking of this boy, which, ups the ante by about 1,000. The one thing I want to touch on is, as a cop, you truly don't deal with a lot of hostage situations. And I don't think you deal with a lot of them that are mobile like this was. So I think back to that cop that dealt with this guy after he picks this kid up and is using him as a human shield. That's probably a pretty tough situation to deal with.
It's crazy, and he did a marvelous job. I mean, he did a great job with, the situation being as fluid and as scary as it was. I mean, it's bad enough to witness an accident and a carjacking, and then when when the officer saw him grab that little boy, it upped the ante considerably.
Yeah, a lot of times these incidents happen, and you put yourself in those shoes, like, okay, what would I do? How would I deal with this? And that's one where you're like, that'd be tough. That'd be a very difficult position to be in.
Well, as a police officer, you run scenarios through your head constantly, and you're always thinking about the what ifs. How would I respond? And I can honestly say I never what ifed this scenario before this day. You would never imagine that scenario unfolding in front of you. And Dave did a really good job handling that day.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. So let me jump back in. So he kidnaps this poor kid, and then he has the vehicle accident. And then I think that's where I cut you off. And then he's running. And then there's a church on the corner?
There is. On one of the corners of the intersection where he crashed, there's a small community church where he backed his way in, pointed the gun at our officer and using the boy as a shield. He backed his way into the church property. And he ultimately tried to break into the church to get inside the building and hide himself. From there, he was unsuccessful, and he moved through the church property across a small basketball playground area, and he entered a residential neighborhood through an alley, and he entered the backyard of just a single-family dwelling.
So, Jay, while this is all going down, where are you and what are you doing?
I was listening to the pursuit and patrol, and when we realized that he had kidnapped a little boy and he was making his way holding a hostage, I remember leaving patrol, my sergeant knew I was a sniper on our tactical team, and he said, "You better get going, right now." And so he released me from briefing, and I immediately, head to our substation in a patrol car going code 3 myself on another part of town to get my tactical gear.
Back then, they didn't have the benefit of having, a SWAT van and all these cool vehicles that we have now. They basically had their gear locked up in a substation. That's where you had to go first, right?
Right. And our tactical vehicle was a blue Ford Econoline van. So, we were equipped, with the best. So, all our gear was in the substation and locker. And so I went down there and put our SWAT gear on and geared up with my rifle and then waited for some other responding SWAT officers before we head toward what we knew was going to be ultimately a command post be set up there at some point. But I knew I was going to be needed at some point.
So this guy takes this kid, he goes to the church, he leaves the church, and then what happens?
He worked his way across an open space, probably only 20 or 30 yards at the very most, and crossed an alley and opened up a gate to a backyard, went into the house backyard. The back door was open to this house, I believe. Entered this house, and the house was actually occupied at the time he entered it with a teenage girl who happened to be taking a shower in the house when he drug his hostage into the house. And he heard her, or heard somebody in the shower, and pounded on the door in the shower and was screaming, trying to get in there. And she wrapped herself in a towel, and she climbed out the back window and ran out the back of the house in her towel down the alley.
Wow. So how did we know that he had made his way to the house? Was that seen by officers or
Dave, the pursuing officer actually
Okay, so
saw
he
that.
basically stayed with them the whole time, which again I think is a great idea and a good job on his part keeping him in sight. So he gets there and basically starts rallying the troops.
Exactly. He got there. Some of this I didn't hear, all the radio transmissions because I was busy getting suited up, ready to go to work. But he would have maintained a position on the perimeter of the backyard to keep an eye on the back of the house while he directed officers into the front of the house. Because on the south side of this residence, I remember there was a school and a park on the south side. So somebody got to the south side of that house real quick to make sure that he didn't go right through the house out to the park or the school.
So, at that point, what we're concerned with is not only the fact that you have this little boy in danger, you have the suspect that's fled, you have to worry about the house, but the other thing is we're trying to keep him from getting back out of there and causing more havoc, basically. So you start worrying about, and I've touched on this before, you have perimeter positions. The perimeter positions are twofold. They're to keep what's in, and they're to keep what's out. We're trying to create that separation, and also the perimeter positions are important based on observation, what's going on, what are we seeing, what are we hearing, and all these other things. Now, along that same vein, I want to kind of touch on, you already mentioned that you are one of our team snipers. So what would you say is the role of a sniper? I mean, what is your primary?
People think as a sniper is just some guy on a roof with a gun who's going to shoot somebody immediately when he gets there. But what I experienced over 14 years is myself and every other sniper that we've had on our team, you're usually the eyes and the ears of the tactical unit where you're in a position where you've got a better vantage point and you can see, you can describe the house, you can describe what you're seeing, what you're hearing. And they're very valuable tools. And so to have somebody, any sniper that has the ability to, explain, positions of windows, where obstacles, doors, anything, trees, neighborhoods, what they see in adjacent neighborhoods, where to hide. So a lot of a sniper and the sniper observer, at the time we didn't have observers. I didn't have an observer with
I was
me.
just going to ask you.
Yeah, so we were kind of shorthanded back in the day. And
So what Jay's explaining is kind of now the protocol is essentially you've got a sniper and you've got an observer with them, and you both have your rifles at whatever your point happens to be, and you essentially take turns. And one person has a really good quality set of binoculars, but your primary role, and Jay hit that on the head, is you're an observer. You are there to relay information. As a SWAT team sergeant, I can't tell you how much valuable information you can glean and learn from those snipers. They have a good ability and the smarts and the training, quite frankly, and experience to find a really good, perfect position to get into, sometimes not so perfect, but you take what you can get and relay that information to you to tell you what's going on, what they see, what they observe. I mean, it's a very important position. other than, ultimately that lethal capability as well, which is extremely important. And sometimes that's the only way you can resolve the problem as well. So yeah, anything else like from your perspective as to the role of a sniper?
That's it, Kevin. I think we've covered it. They're just good at explaining and describing situations, and they're pretty proficient at shooting things and shooting what they're trying to aim at. So
yeah,
that's it.
I think I've mentioned it before, but we used to do a lot of entry training with a sniper, and what that involves is you'd have your sniper set up sometimes well over 100 yards away, and as the entry team guys, as you're preparing to do your training, the sniper would shoot something that was sometimes 3 feet away from your head. The first time you do that, it's a little unnerving, but then you learn and you see just how good these guys are with those rifles, and it comes to the point where you have complete trust in them at that point.
The one thing about being a sniper that I always enjoyed was you got more training even than the regular tactical guys that do entry work. And I think they made us train more because they want to make sure if you're 3 feet away from where that ball is going to go, you want to make sure we're not hitting one of our own guys. And
I'm all for that. Yeah.
So there was a lot of confidence that, our team had in, any sniper we ever had, behind a rifle.
Yeah. And I think back over all the years, I can't ever think of a guy or a gal that was a sniper that wasn't pretty darn good that I had reservations about,
I can't think of any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually we did really well in that position. All right, so anyway, so back to the story. So you're gearing up, you're listening to the radio. We know that the initial officer, Dave, is watching the back. We got someone that starts watching the front. This poor girl comes squirting out of a bathroom window. Thank God, good that she got out of there. Just would have given him another hostage. But you guys do know that he has this kid.
Well, we know for sure he's got one.
Right.
There could be more in there. We didn't know who was in the house. She was just surprised when she came out the backyard. But
was she able to give you any information?
She was able to give. I think she was able to give Dave or maybe another responding officer the fact that she was the only person in the house. So that was great. We knew we had one bad guy and one hostage in the house.
Right. Okay. So obviously you get there on scene.
Right.
What happens then?
Well, I don't remember who briefed me. It was so long ago, but I would have been briefed by probably even a patrol sergeant that was out there giving us the details. It was a very fluid scene because I got there so quickly. They still would have been evacuating neighbors and trying to contain the park and the school on the south side of the house.
Why are we evacuating neighbors?
Well, you don't want to shoot through a house and hit a neighbor. You don't want the suspect to slip out the bathroom window like the gal did and hop a fence, get in the neighbor's house, and you're watching an empty house all night when they've hopped several fences down the way and they got away with a little boy.
And Jay and I are both smiling at each other right now because we've both been on those call-outs where that guy has slipped out exactly like that.
We have watched many empty houses over the years.
So, so obviously that was a rhetorical question. That's exactly why we're doing evacuations and everything. Again, it's all about isolation. We're trying to isolate that problem. So you're getting your briefing.
I got my briefing. We figured we had a handful of SWAT guys there, so they would have been delegated probably in inner perimeter positions to maybe even take over the position that Dave had at the corner of the house, corner of the backyard. And then we were assigning positions. And so I don't remember if I picked my position. A lot of times a sniper will pick his position. But I ended up choosing or being assigned an elevated position on the church that he had tried to break into but was unsuccessful because from that position, I was elevated about 15 feet. I could look over the back fence into this backyard, and I could see some of the house. It was an older established home, so there was a lot of growth and trees there, but I could see the house. Probably I had the best position in the backyard, and we knew the guy went in the backyard and was talking to the officer eventually out the back window, back door, so we figured that would be the best place for at least one of our snipers, and that was the position that I took.
So how far yards-wise were you from your position to maybe the back of the house?
I bet I was no more than 30 or 40 yards.
So from a sniper perspective, pretty close.
So that was very close.
Yeah, real close.
Yeah, real close.
Okay, and so I'm going to jump back to my notes again. So at that point, you guys got set up. You had your tactical officers to the front, some guys to the rear. Negotiations began?
They began pretty quickly. At some point, there was a handoff of, like Dave, the responding pursuing officer, would have handed off his position to a tactical officer, and eventually that tactical officer, probably where Dave was at, would have been joined by a negotiator who at that point is probably just trying to gear up with a bullhorn to establish some sort of dialogue with the suspect.
Okay. I know at one point electricity's cut, and I've touched on that before. A lot of times we'll kill electricity to a house for a number of different reasons. News got hold of it, and so they were flying over, creating a little bit of havoc.
They created a lot of havoc.
Yeah.
You know, this particular call out, I remember at the time Phoenix probably had a half a dozen helicopters, you know, instead of just, you know, one or two that they have now in the news. They were so low and so noisy that we couldn't hear the suspect trying to negotiate with the negotiator, and then it was difficult to even hear our radios, you know, over the noise, you know, of the chopper. So I think I remember at some point there was somebody declared like some air spatial emergency or something. I don't know if they made that up, but
I bet that was Marty.
Marty probably did that. He invented a rule that probably didn't exist, yeah. But I know it worked because the media, you know, moved back and they kept their distance.
They left.
They did.
So now I'm going to touch on a topic that's, you could debate it, it's controversial, but it's not so much when you're the cops. So at this point in the call out, you guys were given clear instruction that this guy was a target of opportunity, which essentially means that if they see this guy, they had decided that he is such a threat to this boy that he's basically a shoot on sight. We're not following the same rules of engagement with regard to that direct, immediate threat of serious bodily injury or death.
Correct. And a sniper is rarely in that position where he's being threatened by the bad guy. He's going to shoot him unless he has a long gun. So I remember receiving information from our tactical team commander relatively quickly in position that he was, you know, at that time we had a name for, you know, the opportunity to shoot, and I was given the green light.
Right.
You know, back in the day they called it a green light. And so I was, you know, ready to go.
So, and hopefully we were clear on that. So it means instead of, you know, having to wait for the suspect to come outside and maybe point a gun at someone, if you see any opportunity to basically end this guy's life, then that's what you did. So from your perspective and everything that you knew at that time, did you feel that that was valid and warranted?
Well, completely, because, I mean, I was told by my commander, you know, at that point, listen, we know enough about this guy's background by now. You know, he's obviously a threat to the community, carjacking 4 vehicles. I think by this time we even knew that he was a career criminal, a violent career criminal that was prepared to use either or both of the weapons that he had at his disposal. And so that 6-year-old's life was paramount, saving this little boy's life. So I got a green light immediately.
Yeah. So the kids, you know, then jeopardy. And that doesn't even factor in with the cops. You know, the longer that these things drag on, the more potential that one of the cops is going to get seriously injured or killed as well. So, you know, it doesn't happen frequently, but there definitely are those times that something like that occurs.
That is exactly. This guy, I remember at some point, told the negotiator that he could see the officers. He could see some of us. And so, I mean, it was even more of a heightened scenario from the police perspective that now every officer that's hunkered down and hid in various areas around the house are now, you know, concerned like, you know, can this guy see me? And if he can, is he able to kill me?
Right. So, okay, so negotiations are established. They're communicating through a back window or a back door. Do you ever hear anything from the kid at all?
I had never heard anything from the kid until later on in the scenario.
Okay. How long do you think there was between essentially the attempt at negotiations and when stuff started to happen?
Yeah, that's a good question, Gavin. Time has a way of being very distorted when you're on a tactical call-out, especially one like this. If you're sitting on a barricade or more of a, you know, static scenario, you know, time seems to make sense to you. But when you're in something like this, you know, minutes and hours sometimes they don't make sense. They never made sense to me, you know, often because in some regards, it seemed like it was, you know, maybe something happened immediately, or other times that, you know, a time between an event and another event seemed like, you know, an hour or two took place. I remember being out there long enough that the sun went down and, you know, we transitioned from daylight to dusk to darkness.
So it was probably longer than you even realized.
It was. It had to be.
But again, that's how call-outs go.
It is.
And there's a lot of time, and unless, you know, something happens to push the throttle, but there's a lot of negotiation. There's a lot of downtime, as we call it.
Right.
You have to let the process take its toll or take its time, and, you know, try to, ultimately, that's the whole point. You know, the preservation of life is one of the goals of our SWAT team,
And the de-escalation, I mean, the longer that's a pretty hot topic word in this environment these days, but, it isn't a newly invented word. We've considered that for decades, in law enforcement, probably centuries, and especially in the tactical world. The longer you can drag something out, usually the likelihood of success is usually increases. This one is just one of these weird ones where, the 6-year-old and this man's behavior was such that if presented an opportunity, anybody could take the shot and try to end the scenario.
Could have and should have.
Could have and should have.
Right,
absolutely.
Right. Yeah, no, I think those are all great points. And so you're up on the roof, and during this downtime, or during the time that they're trying to negotiate, what are you doing? What are you doing up there?
I'm trying to get my bearings on the window that the negotiator is actually having a conversation with this guy on occasion. And maybe in an elevated position, I could see over the fence and under the tree, but I couldn't see through a particular tree. So I remember there being like 4 or 5 different drainage portholes, on this roof that I was on. And so I was moving from one porthole to another, working my way from, one side of the building to the other to try to establish a better line of sight on the house or the important window. If he was at a window talking to the negotiator could see him. I felt like I should be in a position where I could shoot him through that window.
Right.
And I even at some point, considered maybe it'd be a better option to drop down ground level and go, to where the negotiator was, or we should have moved an officer there in hindsight to take the shot. But I was trying to improve upon my position to be more effective.
Got it. So you're not just laying up there doing nothing.
No.
You're strategizing, you're thinking of things, you're trying to figure out what the next move should be, and on and on. And then at one point, and again from just the the research I had done on the incident, tell me about when he came outside on the back porch.
At some point, he came out a door that I was unable to see from where I was at. He put some personal belongings in an empty tin coffee can, and I think he lit a fire. He was going to burn some of his personal effects. When he did that, so now if he's lighting, it was nighttime. It now had transitioned from dusk to nighttime.
Right.
I was able, when I saw this little tiny fire flicker, I was able then to realize where I needed to be in order to get a view of that door. If he was coming out the door, and when I say coming out the door, he wasn't exiting the door. He just reached out about arm's length, and he put a tin can on the ground, and he threw some stuff in and lit a small fire there. But it helped me. I was able to reposition myself to where I could orient myself from a position that was like straight on that door. I mean, it was just like looking straight in the house. But by the time I got into the position of that door, he had retreated back into the house.
And what was he doing? What was he burning?
I think he was burning like his ID or something in his pocket. I don't know. I mean, if I remember correctly, he was burning some personal effects he had. So I don't know if he thought he was going to be anonymous by burning his Texas driver's license. He was burning something to light a little can. He had a little fire out there. And it worked out pretty good because the negotiator at some point could say, later in the scenario, in the problem, he recommended to sellers to come back out. He thought he heard somebody sneaking up on the door, so he suggested, well, you can come out and light the fire again if you want to illuminate the backyard, which I was real grateful for because by this time I had a gun that was basically ineffective, because my rifle wasn't equipped with night vision. Yeah. And so I was, with it being dark, I was unable to see the crosshairs in my scope. So I needed some illumination to be able to...
Need some ambient light.
I did. I needed to be able to see what I'm shooting in.
God, not funny. Not funny. Just, yeah.
Ironic.
Yeah. So he burned his ID, and then at some point he exits again?
He did. I remember being told by Marty, our commander that was out there, that the negotiator had talked him into coming out back again and relighting the fire. And Marty knew that I needed some help with lighting, so he actually... I think he might have climbed up on the roof and told me that here's the plan. He's going to come back out and, light another fire. And when he does, do your job.
That's your opportunity.
Yeah, that's your opportunity. So I was ready and geared up. And we actually were even told, okay, he's coming out now. So, which is kind of crazy. He's going to announce his presence. But it was so dark back there and we couldn't see anything. It was just pitch black, dark, no ambient light. Nobody could see anything. And so I could see where the door was because it looked like a black, dark silhouette by this time. And then I could see it like getting darker, so I knew something was happening. So I presumed the door was being opened. So I was certainly off safe on my weapon and ready to pull the trigger as soon as he struck the match, and I could see
any second at that point.
Any second. No, yeah. I was, on the trigger, ready to shoot.
Yeah. Well, but what happened?
There was somebody shot, and it wasn't me. There was a big giant bang. Somebody took a shot.
Somebody being
one of our tactical officers.
Okay.
Yeah, one of our tactical officers took a shot. Unbeknownst to any of us, this officer had got into the backyard and was hiding on a corner of the house, looking eastbound down the backside of the yard. So he could see things I couldn't see from where he was. So what he could see was Sellers lean out and gear up, get ready to strike the match and set his personal effects on fire. So this officer had a shotgun and took a shot at him with a shotgun, but he missed him.
Right or wrong, good or bad, the officer saw an opportunity to end the problem.
He did.
And takes the shot at the suspect, but he misses.
He missed.
Okay. And so obviously this alerts
everybody.
The suspect and everything.
Yeah, no, there was no secret what was about to happen.
And it also took away from your opportunity.
It did.
Correct?
Correct.
So what happens then?
Well, this officer took a shot, missed Sellers, killed the air conditioner. So the air conditioner was gasping and, venting off stuff. And I was watching everything unfold in front of me, and I was basically handcuffed and ineffective. I couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
And then I saw Ralph run to the back door of the residence, and I witnessed a gunfire. He was shooting at somebody inside. Sellers and Ralph were shooting at one another at the back door. I could hear this little boy screaming, just screaming as loud as, a 6-year-old could scream, being terrified. Then I saw Ralph disappear into the back door.
So what are your thoughts at that point?
This probably isn't going to turn out very good, and I felt quite helpless. When you see things like this unfold, in real time, not on TV or a clip on the movie, it's completely different. You're there to do a job, and the job is to save the life of a little boy and stop this idiot from doing, his criminal behavior. I just thought, we were going to have officer shot and a little boy shot, and I felt pretty helpless up there just narrating. I turned into a narrator at that point, so I was calling out a lot of what I was seeing. I turned into that guy we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah.
Here, where I was just explaining what was going on.
You know what, I'd almost would equate it to, because over the years you talk to dispatchers, and they talk about how frustrating and how surreal it is as they listen to things unfold, and there's not a thing they can do about it. It's almost like that, isn't it? When you're on that roof, you couldn't do a thing. All you could do is watch and talk.
I never understood dispatchers that would talk to me about that or come up and hug me after something I was involved with. But I understood then.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like to me.
You're helpless.
Yeah. Okay, so, and the assumption, just from doing the job and talking to you and everything, is that this officer takes that shot, the shot doesn't connect, the guy darts back inside, so he's basically, he's committed. He's almost committed because now the bad guy runs back in the house, and the bad guy, we already know he's a target of opportunity. Any second he could take this little boy's life, and so he just feels like he's got to continue and go in after him.
SWAT is a very choreographed dance, and for a guy to begin dancing a different dance and not tell everybody else what the dance was going to be, it was a mess, at that point. But
we used to call it freelancing. Not supposed to freelance.
It was freelancing, and giving credit to Ralph and what he did. What happened at the door, he could hear the little boy screaming too, and from where he was at, he could orient where the boy was located inside the house. And so when I saw Ralph disappear into the house, and what he did was he just turned to his right immediately into this fenced patio, not fenced, a screened-in patio area. They call it an Arizona room in Arizona. Unbeknownst to all of us was when Sellers had run into the house, he forgot to grab his hostage. He ran right by his hostage and put some distance between him and his little boy shield. And so Ralph scooped up the little boy and ran out the back of the house and ran to the corner of the yard and passed off the little boy.
Commendable.
Commendable.
Very commendable.
Absolutely.
So at the point that you see this gun battle engage, though, people got hit or not? I mean,
Well,
Ralph got hit, correct?
I didn't know anybody got hit at that time, but we later found out Ralph was hit. But the gunfire that I saw at the back door with Sellers and Ralph exchanging shots at each other, Ralph got shot with some buckshot, or some birdshot, I should say, some birdshot, and it struck him in, I think, the left shoulder, hit his radio, and one of the pellets, I remember, when it pierced his eye, went into his eye. He saved his sight, but his eye deflated, and he had some problems.
And again, to his credit, that was before he continued and made that quick right and grabbed the kid.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, he was shot before he grabbed the boy. He was shot entering the house.
So, like I said, very commendable. So, Ralph exits. He's got the boy in hand. And then what do you see?
He runs to the alley, runs to the backyard, passes him off to somebody at the alley. I'm watching the back door to make sure the bad guy didn't come out the back door, but still my attention is drawn to the little boy who'd just been rescued, and Ralph, who now was brought by one of our tactical officers to an area pretty much directly under me, on the ground under me, on a basketball court, and I saw him sit down and ultimately lay down, and then I realized that Ralph had been escorted to where he was at, let everybody know that Ralph had been hit.
What kind of detail did he give you?
I don't remember a lot. He was pretty frantic, the officer that put it out, and he was pretty jacked up, and he was just kind of spinning in circles, at some point, and it was not one of his probably best moments.
Right.
But anyway, he let us all know Ralph had been hit, but I don't remember ever understanding the condition of Ralph. I knew Ralph was alive. I could see him alive, but I couldn't tell from where I was how bad his injuries were.
Right. So what's going on at that point? What's going on with the house?
We still had a problem with the house. We didn't know if Sellers was alive, dead, injured. What was going on inside the house. We knew he was alone, and we knew he was contained still in the house. We still had a man with a couple guns, in the house that had ill intentions. And he didn't have his hostage anymore, so we felt incredibly relieved about that. But we still had a very dynamic crime scene, SWAT scene.
All right, it's definitely nothing you can walk away from. You still have this suspect to contend with.
Exactly.
Right, okay. So you get the boy, you get Ralph out to point of getting him treatment. And what happens from there? At
that point, a decision was made by our tactical team commander to send our canine into the house by way of the back door. So Carlos, his dog was called Murphy, was instructed to send his police canine into the backyard. He went into the backyard. I remember seeing Carlos release his dog into the backyard and then circle the backyard, looked around. And canine dogs look for fear scent. They look for they're trained for fear scent. And there's a lot of fear scent in this area, everywhere.
Cops too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And so the dog ran around the backyard a little bit and then entered the backyard of the house. He entered through the back door of the house where all the action was taking place. And I saw him disappear into the house, and then I heard a gunshot come from within the house. Murph never came out of the house.
So obviously the assumption was?
Well, I believe that Sellers had shot our police dog, and in fact he had, and Murph died.
Now, what was, I guess, if we can explain the thought process of sending the dog in versus a couple of cops?
There's always a dog, as hard as it is to lose a dog, and I can speak, from a position of being a canine officer, as hard as it is to lose your police dog, it's better than losing a police officer.
Right.
And so that was the thought. I think this is one of those decisions, looking back, that the decision makers that made this decision many years ago, I think in hindsight, they wish that they would have held off on, sending the dog into the house. It turned out that there was an advantage, and it turned out that Murph didn't give his life for nothing, because as Sellers was shooting our police dog, there was an entry team trying to work their way into the front of the house by way of forcing the front door open to come in. But everything was happening at the same time. I'm not really sure if that was as calculated as it can be explained now. Now it makes sense, but at the time I think it was, let's just send the dog in there and see if, what happens. And unfortunately, Our dog was killed.
So looking at this call from, a former SWAT supervisor position, I guess my question is, what was the exigency of having to get anything in there at all? Was there a concern that maybe the suspect needed medical attention, or what? I guess, do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
When I look back at it, and again, I wasn't making that decision, and so there were things that maybe Marty used to base that decision on that
Sure.
were privy that he knew that and understood that I didn't know.
Sure.
I know I used my dog in tactical team training, and we tried to integrate police dogs to see how they would work with the tactical team. And in all honesty, their use in a tactical environment is very limited. And my dog was a mean, ornery dog and liked explosions, and so he was great if you threw a flashbang or a diversionary device around. He would be fine at running in and jumping on it, but he would just as soon bite you, Kevin, as he would Sellers.
Right.
So there wasn't a lot of discretion on who he bit in a tactical situation.
Right.
So often it was too chaotic. This scene is too chaotic to actually integrate a police dog in a tactical situation.
Sure. And again, the thing we always got to remember, and you and I have discussed 1,000 times, it's all hindsight. We don't want to look down upon or sound negative toward those decision makers that made those decisions at that point. It's just, trying to understand and thinking, like you said, quite frankly, you look back at calls like this and there's always something you would have done differently.
Absolutely.
Every time.
Every time.
We debrief these bigger calls and these shootings that we get into, and we always come to that same conclusion that we could have done this different or that different, but it is what it is. You have to make decisions, split seconds, and you wear it.
Absolutely.
You wear it.
Yeah,
you wear
do.
that decision.
Yeah.
So at that point, we have one officer shot, getting treatment. We have one police dog, which is not confirmed, but we do know was shot and killed inside the house. You have a 3-man entry team trying to breach the front door to get in, and they finally get in, and then what happens?
Well, I heard another gun battle, that I couldn't see or help in. It took place inside the house. So shortly after Murph was shot, our police dog was shot, I heard some more shots exchanged from inside the house. And that battle occurred when one of our tactical officers encountered Sellers, who was positioned in the kitchen in a crouched position with a gun in each hand, one pointing to the left, one pointing to the right, one down the hall, one down the living room. And Les came into the area of the hall area, I believe, and encountered Sellers. He lit him up with the light on the shotgun and saw Sellers crouch down. And they both saw each other at about the same time. And Sellers shot at Les, and Les fired his shotgun at Sellers. And they both hit each other. Les shot Sellers with, I think, double-up buckshot to the chest. And unbeknownst to Les, who had fired the lethal shot of our bad guy, he was struck, I want to say it was like with a 44 or 45 caliber pistol. He was shot, and it struck him in the knuckle, and then the round continued on, and it struck him in the right forearm. Les didn't even know he was hit. So, perfect example of how your adrenaline is running. I mean, it's so crazy during these situations. You really don't feel things that you would normally feel.
Yeah, because you don't have time.
You don't have time.
You have to do that later. I remember actually first meeting Les. Les was a great cop.
You're a great cop.
Great cop. I remember he was teaching something, and he had that gnarly scar in his arm.
It was impressive.
Yeah, inevitably someone would have to say, what happened? And
Right.
So Les was always gracious and would say, well, I was in a shooting.
But he never volunteered, and most cops will never volunteer something like that. And Les was modest, and he waited for it to be solicited.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, so we're in the house. There's the second gun battle. Les is struck. Suspect is hit with double-aught buck, and that basically was a fatal round.
It was.
Fatal round, so he goes down, and then I assume that they continue just to sweep, or they move in on him, or what do they do at that point?
I wasn't with him, but I'm sure they went to him, made sure he didn't have any other weapons available to him while somebody, protected the rear, a bit of a rear guard situation. And then they cleared the house, and after they established that nobody else was in the house and the suspect was down, they would have put out a code 4 or, the scene. It's, come on in, we're okay. I remember shortly after the scene was, we were notified that Sellers was down and he was dead. I remember Carlos asking if he could go in and get Murph at that time because he had been told that Murph had been shot.
Right.
So then I watched Carlos run in the back door and grab him, come running out carrying Murph, threw him in the back of his police car and ran him to the vet. Code 3.
Yeah. How about Les? Did Les get some treatment?
I'm sure he did, but I don't think I was around during the treatment. There's a bit of a, when these things wind down, it's not like everybody swarms to the house. Everybody stays out of the house. It's a scene that needs to be maintained, the integrity of the scene. So I'm sure Les was moved out front, and, the expanded perimeter in the command post was somewhat constricted a little bit. And then, some first aid was rendered to Ralph.
Right.
And then I do remember the helicopters came back about that time because, it was pretty chaotic and there was a lot of news choppers.
So this is a pretty crazy call.
It was.
I mean, that's kind of a once in a lifetime for probably most every cop that was on that scene.
I think so.
Really? I mean, that's a chaotic, crazy one.
It was crazy, and I know it had long-term effects on, several officers that were out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to pick your mind about what you think about it years later. But so we had a police dog killed.
Yes.
2 cops wounded.
Yes.
Luckily, both of them were able to stay on the job, though, with some treatment.
They did.
Correct?
Correct.
And I know that Ralph had some lingering issues with his eye, but I'm not
he
aware
did,
of
but
all of it.
he kept his vision. I think he had to go to contact earlier than
Yeah.
he would have had he not been take a BB through the eye.
How about the little boy? Do you ever hear anything else about him?
I never did, and that's funny you ask because in police work often there's no follow up. You come in, you remedy a crisis, you solve a problem, or you're part of a team that renders some assistance, and it's very unfulfilling in the fact that you really never know what happened to people, after you don't see him after that particular night. So I don't know what ever happened to him.
Right.
I know he lived, so that was the important part. And
Sure.
his parents got him back, but I don't know what happened and how.
Well,
I'd like to know what he remembers about that. It'd be interesting.
I've thought about that.
Yeah.
And I've touched on that before, but it's part of the reason that cops' job is so difficult is because you go, you fix, you leave, you go to something else, and we just don't have that time to linger. There's no lingering,
and there's no way to tend you to say. I mean, we know what we do, and we have to believe that they're grateful for the service you provide, but we've had this discussion before. It's not like I can drive down the street and say I build a building over there or anything, but there isn't a corner in any cop city that he's worked that he can't tell a war story about what happened at that particular corner. So that's, I think, the life of a police officer.
So speaking of, identifying that corner, I will say that the city did build a really nice memorial plaque to Murph, and it's in that park. And it's not far from that house. I mean, I saw it some time ago, but I think it's almost right across the street, isn't it?
It's right across the street.
Okay, I knew it was real close.
They have a real nice memorial in that park and for Murphy. And I will say this too: Carlos lost his police dog, that particular night. But the death of his partner Murph, affected my career as well because Carlos could never go back to police work. I mean, he had canine police work. He went back to police work and he finished his career. But I then ended up taking Carlos's position in the canine unit with a different dog that was Murph's replacement. So I had my dog Austin for 5 years on the street and 3 more years with my family before he died. So it had a ripple effect that was beneficial for me and my career, at the expense of Carlos and his partnership with Murph.
So from a canine handler's perspective, and again, because I never had a dog, when a guy loses a dog like that, line of duty, do they typically, is it almost kind of a shutdown, or have you seen guys say, well, it really sucks, but I'm going to get a new dog and continue, or?
I've seen both.
Yeah.
What happened. I know if I had lost my dog in a similar situation, I don't think I could have replaced him and continued in that assignment anymore. There's such a bond between you and your dog. You're together 24 hours a day. It's not like you're just, 8 hours of the street listening to him bark and fart in the back seat.
Drooling.
Right. You're with him at home too. So I think it's hard to continue on with a different dog. Some guys do. They're different and they're dedicated to the canine unit. Not that I wasn't or Carlos wasn't, but they're different and I couldn't.
Yeah. Another good guy, Carlos, too,
Great.
By the way. So unless there's anything else with regard to the actual call, do you have anything else?
I don't think so. I think we've covered everything. It was
so,
a
too.
pretty crazy experience.
So from that call, years later, you've already explained one of the residuals, I guess, with taking Carlos's position in the canine unit. What do you think about that call? Has there been anything that's affected you about that call? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
It was the second time that I had experienced, maybe some post-traumatic stress syndrome or PTSD from it. I went 3 days after that particular call, at home. It actually fell on my weekend, so I was 2 or 3 days later where, I couldn't sleep. I was running things through my head. I felt quite ineffective as a sniper, and I felt I had done a terrible job, and as a result, we had, 2 officers shot and a dog died. My commander, Marty, called, to check up on me, and I explained to him how I was feeling, and he helped me understand what I was going through, and this was back when they didn't really treat maybe the mental part of police work and the psychological portion of the damage that police officers go through the way they do now.
Oh, yeah. No, you guys, that wasn't even considered a topic of conversation
the
back
treatment
then.
Back in the day may have been, hand you a bottle of Jack Daniels.
That's right.
And say, suck it up, so.
Yeah.
And I know it had other effect on other officers. One of the officers I still remember riding back in our, high-tech 40 Econoline van back to put our gear back where it belonged. He made a comment that stuck to me more than anything, and saying, I'm never going to get that little boy's voice out of my head, hearing him scream. So I'll bet to this day that particular officer still hears that little boy's voice resonate between his ears. But I didn't have any long-term, it didn't, I got through my emotional part of that situation just fine and moved forward. But it made me want to even try harder than I was before to be a more diligent SWAT cop. And I was diligent at the time, but, it made me always want to, give 120% instead of 110.
Sure. There's a lot of heroics that day, though. And I think a lot of cops did a really good job with that call.
They did.
And again, we've used this call in trainings, or, when I was still working. You learn a lot from this stuff. That's part of the reason that you debrief and you go over these things. So anything else?
I can't think of anything else.
Any other thoughts on the call?
I know that particular call, we transitioned after losing a police dog. You change things. You change your protocols and, you change your behavior as a responding SWAT team. And so we didn't ever use another police dog in that capacity, ever again. I don't remember us critiquing that incident the way we critiqued debriefed other incidents, later on in my tactical team career, because that occurred, I think I'd been on the SWAT team, maybe 5 years. So, and then I went on another 9 years on the tactical team after that. And we did a much better job, breaking apart our response and our performance. So we built upon, what we could have done better there. So,
sure.
Yeah.
We learn.
Learn
and adapt.
Absolutely.
So. Well, I think we covered it pretty well. And again, I really appreciate you getting in here to talk about that one. And hopefully I can talk you into coming back and doing another one or two.
I hope so.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again, Jay. With that, guys, I'm going to wrap up another episode of I Barely Got Here. If you like the episode, please subscribe, tell your friends, do both. You can follow me at Facebook and Instagram, and you can also contact me if you have any questions at ibarelygothere@gmail.com. And normally, Jay, I sign off with my call sign. So do you have a call sign in mind that you typically...
I can't remember.
What was your canine?
I think I was Zebra or King 400 or King 404.
Let's go with 404.
I can't remember.
So I'm going to say Sam 42 and
King 404.
we are 10-7.